Hey crafty friends, I am using some scorched timber. My focus isn't brilliant, but hopefully you can see that scorched timber from the Distress Oxide range. Tim Holtz, I'm just chucking it down, really rough and ready, onto some corrugated cardboard. This is just waste packaging. It was wrapped around a parcel I received a little while ago, and anything that's got a kind of cool, edgy texture like this, I love to have a bit of a play with occasionally. And I'm wanting to add just a little bit of depth and interest to the corrugated kind of ridges. I've got my Whimsy Stamps blending brush. These are my go-to brushes for all of my oxides. I've got my brushes kind of color-coded before Whimsy started producing these brushes. I love their brushes, they're fantastic. But before they started producing them, I had a range of, I'll show you, sort of coloured ones, which I just picked up from Amazon at the time, I think. It's, you know, brightly coloured kind of ones. And so I use these for my dye inks, and I never confuse them because the coloured ones are for dye inks, but my most used inks are my oxide inks, so grey edges on the packages, and my favourite blending brushes are my Whimsy brushes, so I use them for my oxide inks because it's the ones that I use the most. Now what I'm going to do is just bring over my panel that I'm trying to colour this for, and I'll show you in a second. I've got kind of a fun, funky little make that I've put together here that it's really quite fun. Sorry, I'll just tip that off because it's not actually glued down at the moment. This is a make I've done recently with a background from Whimsy Stamps that's like an Apothecary style background. I'll have to look up the name of it and put it in the comments below. And then I've used the Jeepers Creepers eyeballs rubber stamp, which is really creepy and not really my wheelhouse normally, but it's Halloween, so we're having a little bit of fun. And then I've made a little label for it that says 31% off, which is actually a little stamp that's part of one of the newer Halloween sets from last year that had a little kitty cat and some, I think it's the brooms one, the one that was the broom sale. Again, I'll link those below so that it's easy to reference. And I'm just playing with the idea of colouring up this Tim Holtz label so I can put something there. I'm undecided as to whether I'm going to have it say Curious Things or the Apothecary. I quite like the idea of the Apothecary. What I'm trying to do here with the background is create essentially a textured background to put that onto. I've got some additional texture that I'm going to put behind that, which is like some black webbing, which I'll show a little bit later. But right now I'm in the process of trying to get my colours laid down. This is the only one from my Whimsy set that isn't part of my little carousel of other colours here. These are all my Whimsy ones. Don't know that you can see that particularly well, but I have a little carousel. But so that I never make the mistake of it using it on a different colour, my actual one that I use for my black oxide is a paper rose one with a black handle. So I always know that's my black one. It's the only one that differs from my Whimsy ones. And yeah, I'm just going to bring in some colour around the outside now with a slightly deeper tone, bearing in mind where my, yeah, I don't know, that may or may not be a good idea, we'll see. Quite like the depth of the black soot and just throwing it down. It's not going in down into the crevices, so to speak. It's just sort of sitting on the ridges of the corrugated cardboard, which I think gives it a really fun kind of effect, because it's not, you know, you can still see the pattern, and I think that's going to look quite cool. I'm going to crop it in so that the frame is much closer, but I want it to kind of look like an Apothecary store banner, you know, like a store label out the front. A shop frontage hanging label, like in kind of old-fashioned ye old soda shop kind of hanging label out the front of a store. And so that's what I'm going for. That's my inking of the corrugated cardboard for now. And next phase is to figure out how to cut this. So I'm going to pull out my little Tim Holtz trimmer. I've got a Tim Holtz Comfort trimmer, which I love. It's my go-to trimmer and works really well. This unfortunately is going to be too wet right now to actually put through the trimmer. I need to give it a second just to dry, or otherwise my trimmer blade's going to have black all over it for the next little while. But I will come in a second and run that through the trimmer. It's narrow enough just to fit through the blade there, and then I'll be good to go for the next bit. I'll show you the mesh that I'm going to use to back behind the actual I didn't show you any of this process because we've only just found the the setup for me to do some filming, and I had already made the card before filming any of this process, but I can talk you through what I've done and exactly what I've used on the different aspects of it. The die that I've used for the jar of eyes is the jar die, and I think it's called the Atlas jar die, or yeah, I think it's called the Atlas jar die. And so the lid of that is a separate piece. It cuts the whole thing in one pass. It's also got another little layer that goes inside, so you can actually use it to create shaker cards using that, which is really clever. But I've used the solid piece, and then the separate bit that is the lid for it, I've cut from what is actually quite a shiny glossy cardstock, but I've run some distress ink over the top. I think I just used black soot, same as what I used a second ago. But then I've run a little bit of the Tim Holtz Crypt paste, and just to give it a bit of grit and a bit of texture. I've added some stamped spider webs in the corner and the Apothecary stamp in the background. And before all of that, the first thing I did was to create the inky, moody, spooky looking background, which I've used. I have to think what the yellow was I used. They were spray stains, so I'm going to have to go and have a look. I will list everything below. Honestly, first time trying this, I'm at a loss for words because I haven't prepared myself for all the things that I need to tell you about. But you know, first tries, you just give it a go, don't you? The actual spooky eyes, that was a test piece for me. I never intended to actually use it on a card, so I did it on really thin paper because I was just playing with how to colour the eyes basically, and I thought, oh, it'd be quite spooky if they were really bloodshot. And so I took to this with red Copic pens, and then over the top of that did some much finer, essentially fine liner pens, which I've got a couple on my desk here, and I can show you what I'm talking about when I say fine liner pens. They're the Stiedler Tri Plus fine liner, so they have a very narrow nib on them. You can see just a very narrow nib, which is excellent for getting really good close details like this. I didn't pick up the red one, I picked up the pink one, but that's how I created the very fine crosshatch detail in there, which it's part of the picture, so I was just overlaying on the picture. I think the original colour that I used for the stamped design was a pale grey, so it was quite easy to do it as sort of like a no-line colouring effect. And then I have added in some white every now and again, just to keep the white of the eye a little bit bolder, and then just decided to play with some different eye colours and throw in a bunch of different hues for the eye colours. But yeah, this is as spooky as I go. I think it's really revolting because I'm not a spooky girl. I don't really like creepy stuff. I'm a real too cute to spook kind of gal. So this is about as edgy as I get. I've used for the underneath, the actual Apothecary shelf is one of Whimsy's slimline dies. It's the fence dye, and it has the coolest texture. I don't know that you'll be able to see the texture of it particularly well on the video, but it's got a very cool sort of, oh, there you go, that catches it in the light there. You see the texture of the actual wooden slat? It's got really cool sort of, not quite knots, but definitely wood grain texture. And what I did with that was actually a dark grey. I'm pretty sure it was Spellbinder's Anchor paper that I used as the base for this particular one. And then after I had finished die cutting it, I came at it with some same that I used a moment ago on the corrugated cardboard. So it was scorched timber across the middle part to try and bring the grain out, and then a little bit of the black soot around the very edges of it, just to kind of grunge it and dirty it up a little bit. I'm going to see if I can find the original die cuts, which I may or may not be able to lay my hands on quickly, because, you know, if you're like me, you're a crafter who has your craft stuff everywhere, not necessarily always to hand. Here we go. I can show you the colour of the cardstock. Cardstock was quite different for the starting point, so that's the frame of what I cut it out of, and this is one that I haven't yet coloured, so you can see the wood grain texture of it, but the colour itself, I've dirtied it to really look like a kind of dusty, dirty, grungy old apothecary shelf. Yeah, so that's what it started off as, and yeah, I think that's all I've got to share with you right now. I'm going to play around with colouring probably the background of this, and I'll leave the Curious Things or the Apothecary, I'm not sure. I have both. I'll pull the other one out in a minute and have a play. But I will do a Tim Holtz trick and use a distress crayon to add some colour into the background so that it really makes the words kind of step out from the background, so to speak. Yeah, and that'll be added on here, and then eventually the corrugated cardboard behind once it's dry, to turn this into, I'm hoping, like an apothecary sign, you know, front of a house apothecary sign. So we'll see how that looks. But let me know what you think of the creepy jar of ice. I think it's hilarious. And you may or may not have seen when I was holding it up before that it's definitely 3D. The jar, it sticks out. You can see the twine that I've wrapped behind it there. Yes, it's wrapped all the way around, not just stuck on the front. It's definitely a 3D piece. And I did that on purpose. You won't be able to see inside there, even if I hold it at that angle. But in order to get that flat finish on the sides, I've had to layer 2 bands on the inside that had extra tabs on them, so they were the same width, sort of here and here across the jar, and then I've just turned the tabs under, so they're about a ½ inch on each side, and then instead of gluing it flat, I glued it so the bands were in a little bit and just gently curved the cardstock before I put it on, so that it had that natural kind of bend in it to look more like the shape of a jar. So there's an extra little tip and trick for creating a little bit of additional dimension on your piece. Yeah, that can add just that little bit of je ne sais quoi to make it look a little bit different and a little bit, you know, more of a finished piece. So I will show some photos at the end of the finished piece, but that's where I've got to so far. Hope that you've enjoyed this. Thanks for stopping in on my very first video for the Halloween season. Thanks so much. Bye. I'm back with my finished piece, guys, and as you can see, I've used a really quite large background, which I've achieved by using some Whimsy Stamps shiplap background stamping to create that textured, cool wood grain into the background. I've edged the design with some black soot to really kind of bring it that moodiness in the piece. I've also had a happy accident with the little metal sentiment that says The Apothecary, which is of course a Tim Holtz piece. I've actually, it's not showing well because my sun's so bright today, crazy thing to have as a problem in the middle of summer. In the middle of winter, I should say. But the Apothecary, I sat kind of by mistake in a little bit of alcohol ink, and it just hit the high points on the metal embellishment, and I just think it looks really good. So I left it as is. I was planning to actually alcohol ink the whole thing, and I put it in the tub upside down, and that was kind of my happy accident where it just hit the high points of the words, and I actually really like how it turned out, so I left it that way. I've added some metal embellishments. They've been altered with alcohol ink. And then I put the piece, which you saw in my earlier part of the video, together, and then that's the background, which I'd already made. And the little wooden shelf underneath it is made with the Whimsy Stamps slimline fence die, which I've aged, and I showed you that in the process, earlier part of the process video. For some reason my little bow is obstructing everything there, but that says 31% off.
Thanks for visiting today, friends. I'll be back soon with another crafty adventure. Until then, have fun creating.